Corporate Finance, Core Topic 10, International Corporate Finance, Learning Objective number 5. We're going to learn how to value international projects and investments. In other words, calculate an NPV of an international project. So there are going to be 3 things we're going to focus on this topic. When you have international projects, what you need to do is, number 1, convert all foreign denominated cash flows into US dollars using a forecast of exchange rates, either using IRP, or interest rate parity, PPP, or forward exchange rates, unbiased forward rate. Account for any possible additional taxes or tariffs or anything else related to international flows of money. And 3, we're going to make sure we include a sovereign risk premium in the weighted average cost of capital to calculate the NPV. So we're going to go through this spreadsheet. I'm going to crawl through it. Let me talk about all the assumptions, and then we'll crawl through the spreadsheet and see how I came up with this NPV of $21,455. So this project is it's one I made up. It's Google establishes a software lab in Tel Aviv, Israel, to sell services in Europe. It's going to be a 5-year finite life project, so there's not going to be any terminal value associated with it. And here are the assumptions. The spot price of the shekel is 3.5 shekels per dollar. That's an indirect quote. Spot price of the euro is $1.10. Israeli interest rates are 3.5% per year. Euro is 2% per year. And US is 2.5%. And a market risk premium needed for CAPM is 4.5%. And let's talk about the assumptions of the project. The project is going to generate revenues of 800,000 euros per year from years 2 through 5. However, the labor costs are going to start today, all right, so, or this year. They're going to spend 700,000 in shekels in labor costs to kind of set up the project today. So that's the cost in 1 year. And then they're going to have operating labor costs of 1.6 million shekels for years 2, 3, 4, and 5. They also have, they're going to lease some space, and that's going to cost them 800,000 shekels for years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The project's going to be finite life, 5 years. They're going to need CapEx. They're going to buy in the US. It's going to cost them $250,000. It's going to be depreciated over 7 years. That hardware will be sold at the end of the 5th year for $50,000. Net working capital starts in year 1 through year 4. Then it goes to 0, and that's going to be 10% of revenues. Tax rate is 25%. And let's just say there's a repatriation tax of 5% of positive cash flows transferred from Israel or Europe back to the US. And there's some assumptions here about to get to the weighted average cost of capital. We'll do those later. So let's set up the cash flows first in dollars. So I'm going to go to the spreadsheet. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to forecast the exchange rates for the shekel and the euro for the next 5 years. So today's rate is 350 shekels per dollar. I'm going to use IRP to forecast the exchange rate for the next 5 years. I'll assume these interest rates given for the shekel and the US are for each year, every year. So this is shekel per dollar, 350, times 1 plus the forecasted shekel over 1 plus the forecasted dollar interest rates. So it's forecasting the shekel is going to go from 350 to 353. So what this is an appreciation of the dollar, which makes sense because the US interest rates are lower, which must mean their inflation rates are lower. And then the euro, I'll start off with today's spot price of $1.10 and then multiply that times 1 plus the US interest rate over 1 plus the euro interest rate. And what you see is the euro is appreciating because it looks like the euro has lower interest rates, which must mean they have lower inflation according to IRP. Now let's go get our revenues per year. So I'm going to start off with my revenue start in year 2, 800,000 euros, times the dollar per euro exchange rate in year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. So the dollar revenues are going up because the euro is appreciating. My lease expense, labor, and are both in shekel. So I'm multiplying those amounts by the shekel exchange rate in each year. Don't use the spot price. That's only for today's. Depreciation is $250,000 depreciated straight line over 7 years. That's already in dollars. That gets my EBIT. take out taxes, get my EBIT minus tax, add back depreciation. Notice my working capital is down here, starts in year 2. So let's make sure that looks right. Net working capital percent of revenue, that actually starts in year 2. I'll write that in there. So my net working capital goes to, well, it's a percentage of revenue. So I guess I could have said it starts in year 1, but there's no revenue in year 1. And then it goes to 0. So my change in net working capital in period 1 is 0. Then it jumps from 0 to 88,000. So I have a negative change. And then it comes back. My CapEx, I spent $250,000 today and received $55,000 after tax at the end of the 5th year. That is my salvage minus the tax rate times the salvage minus the net book value. That gives me my free cash flows to the firm. Repatriation tax is 5% on positive cash flows returning back to the country. So I have a little if-then statement. If the free cash flow is positive, put in 5% of the free cash flow, else make it 0. So you notice it doesn't, there's no negative taxes on this. And there I have my free cash flows after repatriation. There's no terminal value, so those are my free cash flows. So I just need to take the net present value, or IRR, of this last row. When I take the IRR, it's 9%. And if I calculate the NPV, I need to come up with a discount rate. So here's how I'm going to do it. Again, this is Google doing a software project in Israel. So I'm going to assume it has the risk of Israel and the risk of software. So the first thing I did is I got an industry levered beta for software of 120. The software DDE ratio is 0.3. So I've calculated the unlevered beta for software, which would be the levered beta over 1 plus the DDE ratio. I then calculated the sovereign risk premium for Israel, which is the difference between Israeli and US interest rates. So it looks like Israel has an extra 1% interest rate. I got the project DD ratio. I can then lever the software unlevered beta by the project's DD ratio and get a beta of 1.02. The project cost of equity is going to be the CAPM rate, which is the risk-free rate, which is the US risk-free rate, 2.5%, plus the beta times the market risk premium. The project cost of debt, I assumed, is 4%. Tax rate is 25%. My debt percent. And I have my weighted average cost of capital, which is 7.67%. And that's why I get a positive NPV, because the project's IRR is 9. So you should go ahead and do this project. And then I did a little data table, varying revenues, or euro interest rates and revenues. And I see that my worst case scenario is when interest rates in the euro are higher and the euro devalues, making my revenue less, and when euro revenues are less. So this gives you an idea of how you do an NPV for a foreign project, and the key is convert all cash flows to dollars by using forecasted exchange rates, not today's. Account for any kind of taxes or repatriation costs of bringing the money back to the States, and make sure the discount rate reflects the risk of doing business in that country and in that industry.